Welcome to ReSounding, a podcast exploring the power of the arts in advocacy and in action. We talk with artists and activists, taking a deep dive into questions surrounding the causes of displacement, the strength and the vulnerability of people on the move, and the potential of the arts to shine a light on social injustice and to impact people's lives for the better. My name is Laura Hassler, and this month I spoke to Godfrey Lado, a poet, storyteller, and musician who fled the conflict in South Sudan 18 years ago to come to the Netherlands. Having experienced war, displacement, and discrimination in his early years, Godfrey now works with undocumented people in Amsterdam, using creativity and performance to provide the route from victimhood to agency and belonging. Welcome to our podcast, ReSounding, Godfrey. Lovely to speak with you today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a delight. We met several years ago, also on an Art27 platform. Mm-hmm. So it's a very nice return. And I noticed that your organization has also joined Art27 by now.
True.
Yeah.
It's I participated in Art27 as an artist myself, as an individual. And what I did a few weeks ago is also register my project.
That's wonderful. And we'd like to get to your project soon, but I wondered maybe it's nice to start by sharing with our audience something about your own history and how you came from South Sudan to the Netherlands and how that brought you to the kind of work that you're doing.
Yeah, that's been a journey. Born in South Sudan, into the conflict in South Sudan, let me say. The first 12 years of my life was practically, in a war in South Sudan. And I thought back then that war was part of life. My dream, I remember, as that kid was becoming a soldier, because that's like 8 out of the 10 men that I saw every day was a guy with a camouflage and a gun. And that spoke to me as a kid. I think I thought it was cool. And that was my dream. I wanted to be a soldier because I thought that's what men do. When I was 12, our city was bombed, so we had to flee with the whole family. And then we were displaced from where I was born to another part of the country that's stable. There was no war there. But the thing is, that side of the country was Afro-Arabic in identity. And the side I'm coming from was purely African. So getting into the new society, I was introduced into something else that was, segregation and discrimination for being different. That was also something new for me, which made me understand the wars I was coming from. As a young man, I knew being in that Afro-Arabic side of my country with an African name, that was not a good combination. No matter how good I become in any quality, the chances that I'll get a life or a job there was very low. So they had incentives for young people like me back then. If you would convert from whatever religion you are into Islam and take an Islamic or an Arabic name, then you get a job, you get a house, you get a wife.
It's so interesting. So you went just within your childhood from experiencing a culture of war to having to flee the war to being in
discrimination.
Yeah, a society in which you felt discriminated against because you came from a different culture.
Exactly.
All within one childhood.
Yes. And and then being a teenager, then I became let me say this in Dutch, a verzetstiener. I don't know how to say this in English. I became
a resistance teenager.
Exactly. So we participated in a lot of sabotages against the government, demonstrations and things like that. When I was 19, I was already considered a danger because of the movements we do with students against the government, the lobby for change. My writings was considered, how do you say, I can inspire people to do stuff.
Provocative.
Yeah, my writings were very provocative in such a way that up to today, I had this guy from my country listening to a song of mine. He said, "When I listen to you, you make me want to pick up a gun, which I don't know if it's positive, and go and fight."
And were you actually part of an organized resistance, or was this more like a kind of spontaneous young man revolting against an oppressive system?
It was spontaneous students' movements, organized from the universities. All the students, they understand resisting against the system. They understand organizing demonstrations, and then the teenagers like me just follow. And now we are happy if we can do something in there that is accepted, or so I wasn't really part of any organization. I was just like an enthusiastic young man that got carried away with all this stuff.
Right.
After a while, I became, how do you say? I didn't become, but the government was the government was desperate for soldiers because it was fighting a war in the southern part of the country against the South Sudanese, who were in resistance in the country because of Arabic and Islamic identity that they don't adhere to. They've decided to call all students that finish their education to join the national service. And after 45 days of learning how to shoot, you have to go to the front line and fight for the government. The only problem I had with that is I'll be going to fight against my own people.
Mm-hmm.
If you come from South Sudan and you're living in North Sudan, then because it was safe, we could go to school. That's what most South Sudanese parents chose for their kids. You have to go and fight against your own people for like 18 months. And then when you come back alive, you can continue with your study. That was not something I was going to do. So I decided to stop studying, stop school. After that, it was hiding because the government, like, they have these curfews where they get young men to show their IDs if you're still in school, or if you finish school, you're supposed to be at the training camp. If you can't prove anything, you're just taken, along. So what they do is they'll stop a bus. They come with a big truck. Two soldiers will get into the bus, and all the young men are checked for their IDs. And those they want to take with them, asked to step out of the bus. You get shaved and then thrown in the bus, and you're taken to a training spot, nobody knowing from your family. And then after training, you're supposed to be taken to the war.
Yeah.
I had to escape that. That's how I ended up in the Netherlands. It's a long story how I got myself to the Netherlands. But in the Netherlands, I also found myself in a situation where I thought, or I felt, being a second-class citizen. Actually, not different from in my own country, where I felt also being a second-class citizen in my own country.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, I noticed that the situation, even though all the situations I've been in my life until then, I was 19 when I got to Holland, were not like the ideal situation a human being would like to live in. But there's been a kind of a change. Like the war child had it worse than the discriminated Sudanese, and that discriminated Sudanese had it worse than the refugee in Holland.
And how was that? How was that experience to be a refugee in Holland? And did you come through the system, or were you sort of in the asylum seeker system, or were you out of that?
Yes, I applied for asylum, and within 2 weeks I got rejected. I was given a temporary permit to stay for a year, even though my case was rejected because they said I didn't have any documents to prove what I was saying, and I was speaking in a language that was not personal. So I was not talking about my personal problem, but I was speaking about a general problem. I didn't understand back then what was the problem with that,
Oh, I see. Because you have to prove that you were personally persecuted for your
Yes.
political beliefs in order to qualify
Yeah.
for asylum. It's not enough that you've escaped a war situation.
That and the language also, like at that point I didn't understand there is an individualistic way of speaking, and it's something I learned many years later when I look back at me then, right now, and I listen to myself back then. there was a question I keep getting, like, okay, what's your personal problem? Things that happened to you personally. And I felt like everything that happened to South Sudanese in the country is happening to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's how I ended up in the asylum procedure with a permit, which they claimed after 3 years, if the situation doesn't change, then I'll get a permit to stay in Holland. Not because of my story, but because the laws in Holland say so. I stayed for 3 years. After that, the permit was automatically changed into a permit to stay on the fourth year.
So it took you 4 years to get permission to stay here.
It took me 4 years to get permission to stay in the country, and another 3 years to get a place. So in total, from I came here in '97, and in 2004 I got a flat in Amsterdam. And in between '97 and 2004, that's the time I've been in the procedure. A lot has happened. 3 years of that I've been on the streets, like undocumented and homeless, and my permit was taken away from me. I've been twice, like, in a psychiatric institution. I've been jailed like 3 times. So all that things made me do what I'm doing today, because that's what you go through as a young person trying to find yourself in a new environment. A lot of people don't get out of that quite well. And I consider myself lucky that I survived all these predicaments.
Yeah. How did you survive that? Because, I mean, it's clear we hear many accounts of people who don't, or who don't survive it either emotionally or psychologically, or sometimes physically even. What gave you the strength to keep going?
Life. Like I said, I started out in that war area, and from the get-go, things were tough for me. I think that played a role in me not breaking under pressure. I've already been down all my life, so I don't know if I could fall under that anymore. So that's one thing, and another thing I believe is having a good foundation from home, as in parents that made sure I was properly looked after. I had an education, so that helped. Having that foundation.
And when did you start writing poetry and writing songs and singing, and did that play a role in this story?
Absolutely. One of the reasons I had to leave was my writings. So writing has changed my life in many different ways. Like, I had to run away from my country because of writing. And then when I reached Holland, I realized people don't know anything about South Sudan. They don't know anything about why I came here. So I started something called the South Sudanese story, and that is writing poetry about South Sudan, and going to events and performing. And at some point, I met an organization that calls itself Refugee Ambassadors, and I'm like, oh yeah, I am also a refugee ambassador. I joined them, and with them, we started doing these guest lessons and guest lectures in schools. And what happened to me during that period of time is that I realized I was kind of healing myself from my past just by sharing them in schools. My initial motivation of doing that was because I thought, okay, I'm being an ambassador, advocating and making people aware. What happened is it started healing me by doing this advocacy. I went, my first presentation to a school was at Almere International School to some 16-year-olds. And at the middle of my presentation, I started crying, as I realized then I was talking about stuff I never really talked about with anybody. Even when they ask you in the IND interviews, like when they want to give you a permit to stay, they want to make sure the process you took to get to that interview is okay. So they're more concerned about the process than the case itself, why you're in front of them. And I noticed by doing that presentation at the class, this was the first time I was presenting my case to those 16-year-olds. And yeah, I started talking about stuff I shouldn't be talking about, which, I couldn't handle it emotionally. I was crying and stuff. But leaving that school, I felt like there was a weight lifted off my shoulder. And I thought, hey, I'll have to do this again, and I never stopped. From then, at some point, I discovered, all these things I'm doing was in English. I couldn't speak Dutch yet. I discovered in the area I'm living in Amsterdam that there is something called buurtinitiatieven. Like you can go to the Stadsdale and ask for money to organize an event that brings the neighborhood together. And
Right.
I started participating in this kind of events, and for me, it was a way of developing my language. But I realized also that I could write projects just because of that, knowing how to write and having a good mind. And before I knew it, in like a year or two, I was working, even though it was voluntary. I was like writing initiatives, and I apply for funds for it from the Start Sale, and they give me this money, and then I organize events. And I could also bring people together, something which for me is natural. I mean, we are together all our lives.
Yeah. Can we wind back to something that you said earlier?
Yeah,
Because you were talking about how when you were first interviewed by
IND.
the authorities,
Yeah.
that you didn't know how to speak in an individualistic way.
Hmm.
And now you're talking about how, from your own story, you came to bring communities together,
Yeah.
or to create ways for people in a community to get to know each other. I find this very interesting. The we idea, and the networking and the connecting among people. Can you say something more about how poetry and music and writing has played a role in this?
Poetry teaches you how to say a lot in a few words. Being a poet, it made me activate those senses that, how can I say it? That are keen to details that the normal person don't think about. When I translate that into events in my neighborhood, for example,
Mm.
I see professionals who are community makers, community builders. They come with a nice plan, and then they create a nice flyer, and then they try to distribute the flyer on a social media platform and put it in people's boxes. But in an area like where I live, where the average person is a migrant, I don't think you can reach them like that. We speak to each other when we stand on the balcony, when we meet on the streets, when we're in the shop. That's when we connect. And that was my power. I'm like, hey, I'm doing this here, the pump station, around next to the pump station at the school there. Can you come? And we have. So walking from my house to the market, I talk to a few people that will bring me 10 people to an event. These are people who have flyers in their post, in their mail. They probably threw it away or even didn't see it.
Right.
So that's like a concrete example. And then again, when you're in front of people with a story, you have to have that language that reach these people. And that's also where the poet comes into action, finding the right language that represents everybody. Everybody can relate to what you do or say in that way.
When you write a poem or a song, are you trying to communicate like a message? Are you trying, or are you expressing your own feelings, or working through the things you've been through, or how do you see that, or how does it happen when you're creating, your own art? How does that come for you?
So the beginning of your question is when you write a poem, and then I shook my head. The reason I did that is because I don't write poems. And then
Uh-huh.
in the end of your question, you said, how does it come? I nod to that because that's how it works with me.
Okay,
I never write poems; they just come.
they
I
come. Yes.
Yeah, I can be watching a film and that inspires something in me that makes me want a sentence in the film, a dialogue, a picture, and that can be also on the streets walking, and then I see something, I hear something, and then I have to write something about it. Sometimes it's a line, sometimes it's a whole poem. It's in English, it's in my language, it's in Dutch. It's never really a planned thing, but I can write anytime I want to write. I can write a poem. So I own that writing. But for me, what I call my poetry is always come, like inspirations. So I don't want to kind of spoil that by doing things that I want to force myself. It's really beautiful the way the pictures that comes are nice, the way they do. I was writing. Somebody from my country heard that I could write very well. He's a singer. So he came to me. He said, "Can I use some of your words in my songs?" I'm like, "Cool, it's no problem. I like that. I never tried that before, so let's do it." That's how I got into music. This guy goes with my lyrics. He recorded a whole album, and when he will present it to people, he'll be like, "Godfrey wrote these songs." I didn't write the whole album, but he wrote some of them, and I wrote some. He'll be like, "Godfrey wrote these songs." And when people started liking the songs, it became his. And then after a while, I was not there anymore. So I got really pissed at him, and I decided to go to the studio myself and record a song. And then it turned out I could sing. That was for me also a surprise.
And does that work with songs the same way as with poems? Do they also just come to you?
Absolutely. The thing with songs is because of the arrangements and stuff. You can fine tune it to fit a specific arrangement, but it is the same way. I have songs that are still half a verse from 5 years ago. I couldn't finish them because I'm waiting for the next verse to come. And like I said, I don't force them, and I have songs that come like complete arrangement and stuff. So it's the same.
يلا نعمل شنو كده خبرة شنو انتخابات يلا نعمل شنو كده خبرة شنو انتخابات so it لزولتكم so it لناستكم so it لزولتكم so it لناستكم يلا so it لزولتكم يلا so it لناستكم so it لزولتكم.
And can you because your initiative that we were going to talk about today, you're working with undocumented people in Amsterdam, right? You're helping to open spaces and create chances for people to recover from what they've experienced and to find a place and to identify themselves and either find skills or find a way of expressing themselves. And this creativity that you're talking about that you've used so much in your own life, your poems, your songs, and so forth. Does that play a role also in your work with others?
Absolutely. I was on my way to get there because
sorry.
because my own is a real journey that if you listen to it, it makes sense. It's all connected to each other. So starting with the Sudanese story, telling it as a poem, as a poet, let me say, and a singer singing about South Sudan, trying to inform people why I'm here, and then discovering the refugee ambassadors, and then using the same format to also to promote and to make the refugee heard, to give the refugee a voice. The thing is, if I have a message, I package it in the different disciplines I have. The same message can be in a song, in a story, in a guest lesson, and so I became that refugee ambassador. That refugee ambassador decided to get into the neighborhood and introduce the refugees to the neighborhood. Like, yo, I'm living here. where we are living, there are some people who came here from other countries, running from a conflict. Let's get to know each other. That became an event called Exodus Evenings, in which I have every 4 weeks a country that fled to the Netherlands present itself on stage to the people of Amsterdam. Exodus is, of course, from the Exodus, like movement of a people.
Sure.
And we did a lot of events with the Exodus Evenings, and also awareness. And then alongside this working with the neighborhoods and starting the Exodus Evenings, there was this We Are Here movement that was in Amsterdam.
Yes. Undocumented people.
Yeah. Because I know some of them, being like my, how do you call them? Lotgenoten, fate mates. I don't know how to say that.
Mates, yes. Fellow travelers.
Yeah. People on the move, indeed. I know some of them are from my time. They didn't get any permit. So I thought, okay, now that I'm active in the neighborhood and I'm active with music, I have created some friends. Let's create a band, the We Are Here band.
Uh-huh.
That's how the We Are Here band started. I got a few friends of mine who are musicians and a few guys from the undocumented migrants. And it became like a band that did a lot of wonders in a short time, performing in Paradiso, Schouwburg, and many spaces. It's like a statement band that made also the group become very like visual and unknown. So with them, how do you say? I involve these guys in my events, the undocumented group. 2019, the government in Amsterdam, the municipality started creating shelters for this group because of the We Are Here movement, the pressure. They've decided to start like an experiment and see if they can shelter undocumented migrants. And that's when I applied for a job with the organization that's catering for the shelters. And while working with this organization, I did that because for one, I've been an undocumented Amsterdamer for like 3 years in the 7 years I was talking about before. And I am a refugee. I came here as a refugee, so I understand these guys like nobody else can. And to work for them will only help, them. So while working for the shelters, a friend of mine who was working with me at the shelter, she did a job interview for the foundation I'm working in right now. And this foundation is looking for somebody that can connect the undocumented migrants with Amsterdam. And while doing her interview, she thought in the middle of the interview, like, actually, you guys should get Godfrey to this job because I know somebody that can do this better than me.
Wow.
Yes. She stopped her interview and came and told me, Godfrey, there's an interview there. You have to send them a letter. That was very funny. And nothing.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Really wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and before this, you had just really put all of these elements together without a job or a backing or a foundation or anything. You had just done it. Am I right?
Yes, I did it with, how do you say, with an outcaring.
Yeah. So that's, and so interesting that then you were seen and recognized as having this ability because it came out of what you had just done out of your own initiative. And that, as I hear it, but correct me if I'm wrong, is partially your identity as an artist or your being as an artist, and partially this feeling of we and community building, and partially it's understanding the position of undocumented people because you've lived it yourself. Those three things.
Position of the underdog generally.
Yeah.
I've been an underdog in my own country as a war child, been an underdog as second-class citizen. In all these years, when I discovered also I have a talent in Holland, like there's a lot of institutions that didn't accept me, probably because
they did not accept.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, like, these same institutions now hire me, but they wouldn't contribute into my development as an artist.
Once you've achieved a certain status or a certain recognition, then it's much easier to be seen and appreciated than before you've had the chance to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in your work, because you're in your ambassadors program, because you're supporting undocumented people to basically to be representatives, to speak on behalf of. Is how does that work? How is that moment for people of moving from being unseen, undocumented into being a representative? Is that empowering? Do people ever feel used by that? How do you experience that?
I never let that being undocumented be my end. That was, I always believed in something more than that I wanted to achieve, and that is the beginning of motivation. Going to the school where those kids, where I said I was crying, that empowered me. I wanted to do that. I want to give other refugees the chance to get in front of the people and tell them his personal story and see what that does with him personally. And I'm happy when I listen to Amir, when I know a guy, one of my ambassadors called Sunny from Nigeria. He said he's never spoken in front of a public before, but now he's one of my best speakers. And he talks about how he left Nigeria, through Niger, through Libya, being sold as a slave, and the experiences he went through crossing the seas. They never said to me that they experience a kind of a healing by doing that the way I do, but I see they love doing it. It's a moment where, when they exist for the time they're being ambassadors, they are the center of attention in a life that otherwise nobody cares about. So the whole society calls them undocumented. The government, we put them aside as undocumented, and I put them on stage as people to be listened to. It's very powerful.
Godfrey, are there any events or campaigns or anything coming up that you would like to draw the attention of our audience to? That especially the people, maybe, both people in Amsterdam, but if there are also opportunities for people who are listening from other countries or other places, how can people learn more or see more or participate more in your activities?
Home is a story you carry on your back. It's a storytelling course we teach, and then the people perform. After that, in an evening we call Stories Where We Are From. There's one coming up in June, the third week of June. These evenings we always organize them together with Framed East. So anybody that will be around at the time, just keep the agenda of Framed.
Framed in Amsterdam.
In Amsterdam, yes.
Framed, yes. It's wonderful, yes.
That's something. There is at the moment a discussion about whether they should continue sheltering undocumented migrants in Amsterdam or not. I see the two top political figures that are discussing this are on the opposite sides. There's one guy who is absolutely for the shelter, and the other one is against. Anybody listening should speak up for the shelter, because otherwise we have undocumented people on the streets, and it's not only bad for them but for us as Amsterdam.
So it would be good for people tuning in from Amsterdam to get in touch with their representatives and urge them to say yes to promote sheltering undocumented people.
Yes.
Yeah. Anything more that our audience can do? Any ways that people can you share, for example, just share the name of your website or your social media platform so that people can listen and follow what you do?
ASKV. When I say that in Dutch, it's AS Cafe. And every time I say that on the phone, people say to me, which cafe?
Which cafe, yeah. AS.
Yeah, and .nl, that's our website, askv.nl. On the website,
Okay.
you can see a lot of, you can read a lot of information about what we do, but you can also see a lot of different ways you can support us. You can do that in donation form, but you can also donate a cost to us. So if you have a skill that you're not using anymore, you want to share it with undocumented migrants, we welcome this.
I really hope that there's some response to this. I'm very glad that you've joined ARC27 and look forward to, sharing events coming along and learning more about your work and seeing whether there are ways that other members of the platform can interact with your initiative as well. And as we really try to be a platform that is opening up these human stories and doing that through the arts. So I think there may be very many, arts initiatives in the Amsterdam area who would be interested in getting in contact and perhaps collaborating with you.
Would be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, very much. It's so grateful to you for this conversation, Godfrey. Thank you so very much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you.
The same. It's gelijks.
ReSounding is brought to you by the ARC27 Network, a network of like-minded initiatives using art and culture to respond to the ongoing crisis of displacement of human beings in Europe and around the world. To find out more and to join our growing network, you can visit our website, art27.art, or follow us on Facebook at art27. This podcast was produced and edited by Ed Holland. The theme tune was written by Matteo Galesi in collaboration with SYNCR. Thank you for listening.